Today we'll be discussing about a history that impacted Black people in the past, the Louisiana Slave Code. The key topics will be about all the 10 codes slave and slave masters had to obey and follow.
Hi, I'm Serenity. I'm going to be discussing the first 5 Louisiana slave codes. The first one, expulsion of Jews. The code mandates the expulsion of Jews from the colony. The second one, religious instruction. It requires slave owners to provide religious instruction to enslaved people. 3, religious worship. Only Roman Catholicism is allowed. Other forms of worship are prohibited. 4, supervision of Catholics. Slaves must be under the supervision of a Catholic. Non-Catholic supervision can lead to the confiscation of slaves. Sundays and holidays is the 5th one. Slaves are prohibited from working on Sundays and holidays with punishment for violations.
My name is Bree and I'll be finishing the rest of the Louisiana Slave Code. Number 6, racial intermarriage and concubinage, meaning the marriage between whites and blacks are forbidden. Punishments are set for illicit relations and the children of such unions with different outcomes for relationships between masters and slaves versus free blacks and slaves. Number 7, marriage of slaves. The consent of a slave's master is required for marriage, and the master cannot force a slave into marriage. Number 8, children born to slaves inherit the status of their mother. If a slave man marries a free woman, their children are free. But if the free man marries a slave woman, their children are slaves. Number 9, gatherings of slaves. Slaves are forbidden from gathering in groups, whether for weddings or any other reason, under the threat of punishment. Number 10, master responsibility for gatherings. Masters can be punished if they allowed their slaves to gather with slaves from other plantations. And last but not least, commerce and trade restrictions. Slaves are prohibited from selling goods without their master's permission, and harsh penalties are imposed on those who violate this rule.
We think that these historical laws connect to modern day issues because the prejudice that had to create, like the reason behind these laws, the prejudice is still there and it's still alive till this day. Even if it's not acknowledged by the news, it's still deeply rooted in certain families, especially in America. So we think that with the creation of these laws, a lot of people might feel spiteful throughout time, especially back then. So their fathers or their mothers, especially those who were slave owners, may teach their children will teach their children. So even throughout history and until now, there are still people who go against these laws in the dark and private, maybe even in public gatherings, but those aren't acknowledged by the news, even though they have been seen before. So we think that it connects to modern day issues because that issue of the past is still a modern day issue. It's the same issue.
Me and Serenity will be discussing about the slave auction domestic slave trade, and this is our concept map. Okay, the first branch of our tree here will be the preparation of slave trade. In the story of excerpt from 12 Years a Slave by Solomon Northup, it was described as conducted into a large room in the front part of the building to which the yard was attached in order to be properly trained before the admissions of customers.
The next part is slave trade. In the case of slaves' role for slave trade, owners do something called jocking, which is basically seeing what they liked. This may be for looks, body, personality, and working qualities. Basically, check to see fit for slaves.
And for our third branch would be family separation. In the story of excerpt from 12 Years a Slave by Solomon Northup, the story of Elza and her son is described as grieful, as because the owner couldn't pay for the full family, they were separated. Eliza was crying aloud and wringing her hands. This moment describes the impact of family separation.
The fourth one is emotional impact. The emotional impact of slave trade left people as well as families broken and in distress, as they have to beg not to be torn apart.
And for the conclusion for our branch, slaves have none to count on, so they beg and plead to the white men so they won't get hurt or separated from family. The slave trade is really an emotional distress for slaves because they're brought into a new land, being mistreated, and this is what people don't see in today's generation. And it should be taught about even more.